gonna wait a minute to see if anybody joins the chat on YouTube or on Instagram. Um, so anybody who's joining right now, got a couple on Instagram. Um, I encourage you to go to YouTube. I just posted a link to my story because I'm trying to get the YouTube algorithm to work in my favor, and that means getting the views up on YouTube. But anyway, I'm going to be recording this on YouTube and posting it, and but not on Instagram. Okay. Hello from the beautiful Idaho mountains. Hello there. Very underrated, the Idaho mountains. A little over a year ago, I was traveling south on 89 and 89A, and Idaho had some of the best views. The Grand Tetons are over there, and the west side of the Yellowstone National Park. So anyway, talking about what's going on in the sky right now. Saturn just having moved into Pisces, and the full moon in Virgo. Although I hate to actually disappoint anyone, I'm not going to exclusively be talking about that, because transit astrology in some ways is my way of capturing people's attention and to get them to focus on what's actually important, which is your birth chart. You should know yourself before you focus too much on externals, focus too much on what the world is causing to happen around you and in your environment, because that's not anything that you can control. The only thing you can control really is your responses to externals and also to yourself. We're not entirely intrinsically in control of what comes up inside of us when dealing with reactions to externals. But it is part of us, and astrology is one means of helping us to dig out the origin or the foundation of where those responses are coming from. And so I'm going to start with the moon a bit and talk about some basics regarding the moon and Saturn before we start talking about this transit of these things being in particular signs. But still, even if I were to do that, that wouldn't give you much of an essence in understanding what those planets actually do, what they are, and what they represent psychologically, spiritually, perceptually. So we have to drill the basics here. Okay, you can only like psychic intuition can only get you so far in astrology. Essentially, you really have to be solid on the fundamentals. You have to understand that it is a technical science above all else, really, and that intuition is your guide through in choosing which methods are right to employ in certain cases. Intuition also guides us as far as what to focus on within a birth chart. Because if I'm consulting with someone, any number of things could pop out to me in their birth chart when they say something along the lines of, oh, I keep getting into these bad relationships. Like, how do I find a relationship that's not with a narcissistic, cheating asshole? You know, there could be plenty of reasons for that, ultimately. But so I'm going to talk about the moon real quick. Insofar as astrology is a means of helping us to better understand our responses to things, our reactions to things, natal chart or birth chart astrology, anyway, then there is going to be a planet each of which represents a different part of ourselves, our perceptions, and our experience in the world. There's going to be a planet that represents those responses in the most raw fashion, and that is the moon. The moon is our emotional nature. It's how we internally react to the external world. It's who we are to ourselves when we're by ourselves, when we don't have the energetic influence of other people in our environment. And that's why it's so hard to break through to people's moon sign side of their personality, because it's the deepest and it's a major part of the personality. So this deals with how we react to things internally. And so the moon represents our mood swings. It's the fastest moving planet. We call the sun and the moon planets in astrology. It's the fastest moving planet that we deal with in astrology. So the moon represents our mood swings. The moon represents how we react to externals in an internal way. And so I don't put a whole lot of emphasis on moon transits whenever they are happening. People like to freak out about the full moon happening, about the moon being in a certain sign. But really, these phases happen every single month. So these are things that we have to deal with pretty frequently. So people often have a hard time when the moon travels through their eighth house, especially if they don't have any birth chart planets in their eighth house of their birth chart, because the eighth house is a deep house. It's a psychological house. It's one that deals with emotional reactions to things, power play with other people, with partners. It deals with other people's resources and other people's sense of power and how we manage that, their finances. So when the moon travels through someone's eighth house, they can be very reactive because those are very touchy subjects. So maybe at that point, that 2.5 day period every month, it changes slightly from month to month, when in the month it's going to be. The person can be extra sensitive when it comes to those topics. Okay. So I can't tell you a whole lot about what the full moon in Virgo actually is right now, because I don't know where it's traveling through your birth chart. And that's what matters for you. And that's why birth chart astrology is essential. Even a planet as visible and conscious to everyone all the time as the moon, you look up in the sky and see it, it still does not capture how it's going to affect you personally by stating, oh, moon in Virgo is like this or like that. We can look a little bit into what the moon in Virgo is like in a birth chart when someone has this style of internal reaction. And that is typically someone, moon in Virgo birth chart person, who has an attention to detail, who is pretty scientifically minded. Why? Because Virgo, let's look at the qualities of it. Virgo is a mutable sign, so it's changeable. It's generally good at dealing with changing conditions and the details surrounding that. It is a feminine or introverted sign because it's an earth element sign. It's internally focused. It has an internal logic that it uses. And so it's nitpicky. It's detailed focused, and it's kind of self-centered, as all more feminine or introverted signs are. They're more self-focused. They operate from an internal kind of logic. And so when your emotional nature, your moon sign is Virgo, that typically gives someone can be anxious, but very an emotional nature that's concerned with details. Okay, whether they're happy or sad. All right. More often than not, it's going to depend on other things in the birth chart, how the moon is aspected, but whatever drives them is is in the earth, is in the substance, is in the stuff, the details. If that makes sense. So Virgo also, if we look at where the Virgo mansion is in the sky on the ecliptic, it's the end of summer. Okay, it's a mutable sign, so it represents a transition into a new quarterly phase, into a new season in tropical astrology, which is what I use. So it's getting ready for the shift. Virgo is kind of done with summer. It's over it. The vegetation, the flowers, everything that thrives during the summer typically is on its last legs. It's on its way out. It's starting to wither. Maybe we're getting the first cold snaps around this time, depending on where you live. So it represents a changing of the seasons into the next phase, but not there yet. It's the end of a phase in preparation for the next. So being an earth sign and being a changeable, mutable energy, Virgo is about harvest. Okay. It deals with harvesting, like reaping the benefits of what you've been preparing for, what you've been working toward, producing something tangible, earth, physical stuff. Virgo is, again, a more feminine energy, can be quite maternal, motherly in its own way, not in the same way as Cancer necessarily, um, but it's focused on turning the dials ever so slightly and micromanaging things so that the details are just right. Okay. So it's about planning as well, planning for the winter, because that's what we do when we harvest a crop during Virgo season. So we're planning for the winter. We're stashing up. Virgos are good at planning things, especially Sun and Mercury in Virgo. When we look at Moon in Virgo, it's more about, again, our way of emotionally dealing with externals, how it is that we internalize things. So this may be something you're inclined to do anytime the moon enters Virgo. To some extent, you feel like a micro experience of having what it's like to have moon in Virgo, because you have Virgo in your chart, even if you don't have any conscious personal planets in Virgo. The sign of Virgo, any planets moving through that sign, are still going to have effect on your chart. So look at where Virgo shows up in your chart, which house cusp it covers. That's going to determine the area of life in which you may get a little anxious over the details of things, or you may be inclined to plan things, micromanage things, pick things apart. Also, harvest, conserve things. Virgo's, as far as mutable signs go, Virgo is pretty conservative. Okay. So when the moon is transiting Virgo, it's going to have an effect that is as strong as the visibility of the moon is bright, roughly speaking. So, so Virgo has its most intense effect right now. Full moon phases tend to represent that sign on the moon in its fullest essence. Okay. The brighter the moon is, the more conscious it is to us, the more conscious the effects are felt. And I'm not saying that there's a causal relationship between these things. Okay. For whatever reason, astrology works. I'm not making a philosophical claim about uh, any causal power that it has, that the planets have on our perception. It's not what I'm talking about. All right. When I'm talking about the relationship between how something looks and what psychological metaphors we can draw from that. But it seems to work. Virgo is as I'm describing right now. Why? Okay. So, anyway, move over to Saturn a bit, and then we'll uh, talk about the transits a bit more. So, for the last 5.5 to 6 years, Saturn has been in its two ruling signs of Capricorn and Aquarius. Aquarius most recently, and so we've been experiencing not necessarily the best effects of Saturn because ruling signs don't embody the most well-rounded version of a planet that they rule. They represent rather the most raw manifestations of that planet. They tell you about what that planet is really about in two different ways. That's why in traditional astrology, and that there are two sides to every planet and how they could manifest in their extreme spectrum sort of ways, which is why in traditional astrology, there are two different signs that rule each planet because there are kind of two signs to each planet. There are two sides, rather, to each planet. And so Capricorn embodies one extreme end of the Saturn spectrum, and Aquarius represents the other. And they both have to do with the same topics, the same things. All right. Boundaries, principles, moral principles. Like our deepest karmic sense of right and wrong is Saturn. Saturn is the arbiter of moral judgment. And given how its ruling signs, Capricorn and Aquarius, are, um, that's a lot of load to put onto the shoulders of a planet to call it the arbiter of moral judgment. Like, in a sense, your relationship with authority depends on the condition of your Saturn in your birth chart. Okay. Both inner and outer authority. But depending on the sign that it's in, depending on the aspects that it's making to other planets, it's going to take many different forms. Okay. It's going to incline you to one of two things, either saying yes to authority more often than not, or saying no to authority more often than not. So, how does this manifest in the Saturn ruling signs of Capricorn? Well, they both have control issues when they're uninhibited and don't have any mediating factors around them. Capricorn and Aquarius, they in a way could not be more different. They are signs of different elements, different modalities, and different genders or um, energy exhibitors. I like to say introversion versus extroversion um, for the duplicities of the signs. Some people like to say gender because of the relationship between introversion being internally focused and being feminine, and then being externally focused and being masculine. Okay. So Capricorn is the introverted sign. Aquarius is the extroverted sign that is associated with Saturn. And they are the previous signs to Pisces, where Saturn lies right now. So in Capricorn, it's about internal authority, it's about self authority. And so it's about drawing boundaries between you and other things and staying within the boundaries. So in a sense, you're drawing a boundary around yourself. And you're telling the world, hey, I've got this. All right. I'm my own authority. No one can tell me what to do because I've drawn a wall between myself and everything and everyone else. I can handle myself. So there's a sense that Capricorn has of being fiercely independent and introverted in the process, like coming off as though they don't really need what lies beyond the boundary. Aquarius, on the other hand, also draws a boundary between themselves and other things, but they actually draw a boundary between a detailed set of people, facts, information. It could be anything. And they stand outside of that boundary. So the symbol for Aquarius is the water bearer, being sitting on a cloud, dumping the water of truth onto the earth, onto the people's heads beneath it. So it's trying to take an objective seat in this reality, Aquarius. And it's trying to say, I am literally above you. I'm the one sitting on a cloud in the sky. Here's the truth in this bucket of water. And here it is, whether you like it or not. Pours the water on everyone's heads. So Capricorn strives to be the master of itself because it's introverted, internally focused. Aquarius strives to be the master of the material world, of others. And it says, I know better. I have scientific authority, we could say. And I can see things for how they are. And here's the truth. And I'm not involved directly. I'm just giving you the information. So the mistake that Aquarius is making is that it's placing itself as the authority of the universe, in a sense. So how has that manifested in the last few years since Saturn went into Aquarius in 2020? Appeal after appeal after appeal to scientific authority and the blind following of it. And also here's I guess what we could call the paradox or the irony about Aquarius in kind of sitting on that high cloud, dumping the water of truth onto people, is that in order to be that authority of information and sort of scientific thinking, it is dependent on those other people to exist. If it wants to draw a boundary around information or around a population of people and define things in a certain way, then it's that process of being different, more intelligent, etc., is contingent on the existence of others, the existence of that information. Okay. So Capricorn, the Capricorn manifestation of Saturn is drawing boundaries against externals and saying, no, this is me. This is why I don't need everything that's outside of that barrier. Aquarius is more deeply concerned, more consciously concerned with the information itself, with those externals. And that's what it's kind of seeking to control. So I'm talking, putting all these things in terms that seem kind of negative. But I mean, I'm a Saturnian person. That's kind of what I do. Okay. I I look at what could go wrong and I try to draw a boundary against that, unless it's something that we have to deal with, right? But both Capricorn and Aquarius obviously have their drawbacks, being the Saturnian, the most raw manifestations of Saturn. And that this is simply to emphasize my point that I made earlier about ruling signs not being the best or the most well-rounded versions of the planets that they rule. They're just the most blunt. They're just the most obvious. Like look at Venus. Okay, Venus is about one's social nature and romantic nature, feminine nature, its way of connecting to people and things. And so, people and things, the things that we're able to connect with, represent the themes. Those are the themes of the two ruling signs of Venus. One being Taurus, things, stuff, fixed earth, okay, touch, physical world. Libra being concerned with people, connection to other people. All right. So again, that's for better or for worse, right? You can be a very Venusian person, but in a Libra way rather than an Earth way, Taurus way, right? So, what about Pisces? Saturn moves into Pisces. Goes through its ruling signs, Capricorn and Aquarius, that in very different ways are very concerned with boundaries and restrictions and how we're managing ourselves, how we're setting principles to live by, rules to live by. Okay. Capricorn and Aquarius, both concerned with that part of the equation. All right. Saturn evolves out of Aquarius. Okay, so in Aquarius, it's standing outside of the boundaries that it drew into Pisces, a place that is mutable. Pisces is mutable, it's watery, it's mostly feminine. And if you know anything about Pisces energy, it generally struggles with not necessarily holding to boundaries, but making a decision in that regard. So Pisces can be very indecisive in a way that Aquarius and Capricorn are not. So this is already kind of strange for Saturn, right? Because we think of Saturn as being a very decisive force. In Capricorn, it's in a cardinal sign. So it's driving forward. It's forward focused. Capricorn is a cardinal sign. It's all about initiating things, putting things into action. So Saturn is moving in Capricorn forward. It's fixed in Aquarius. But Aquarius is also concerned with movement because it's air. Okay. So, I mean, we could think about air as being the most movable, unrestricted element. And weirdly enough, and this is why Aquarius is weird, Aquarius is fixed in taking that form, is fixed in having the potential to move wherever it wants to because it's air. But it's a fixed sign, so it's stubborn. So it's like stubborn about being different. It's stubborn about standing out from the crowd. It's stubborn um, about being right. It's fixed. All right. So Capricorn, Aquarius, in certain ways couldn't be more different, but they're both concerned with boundaries. And being a fixed sign, Aquarius does not want to move away from its boundaries that it's set away from because it's already outside of those boundaries, right? Capricorn doesn't want to leave the box. It draws a box around itself and it wants to stay there. It's remember, Capricorn is the opposite sign of Cancer, little homebody Cancer, the ruling moon sign. So Capricorn has some of those qualities too. They share a duplicity. All right, earth and water are the more introverted feminine elements. Okay. So Saturn finds its place in more feminine or introverted element in Capricorn, and an more extroverted, fixed earth element. I'm sorry, air, extroverted masculine air element in Aquarius. So when we move, and they're both concerned with boundaries. So when we move into Pisces, Pisces is probably the most likely sign in general to have spiritual transformation that is kind of obvious to everyone. In a way, Pisces is the most developed sign when it's at a high frequency, operating at a high frequency, because it's the 12th sign. Okay, so in a way, it involves evolution as being intrinsic to it, spiritual evolution, because we've moved through the first 11 signs into Pisces. So if the burden, and we associate Jesus Christ with Pisces, by the way, the two fish, it's kind of like the dual pagan symbol for what Christ actually represents. And that is, I guess, to put it extremely simply, it's a version of spiritual enlightenment that just happened to be, the foundation of an entire religion. So it has a dual nature to it. Pisces is neither, it has both feminine and masculine qualities to it. Okay. And so, whereas the ruling signs of Saturn are concerned with boundaries, borders in two different ways, Pisces has an issue coming to terms with like the concept of borders early on in its underdeveloped state. But when it becomes more spiritually developed, it can be the best at determining that. What's right, what's wrong, where should we actually draw the line? But it's hard to get there, right? Because Pisces has the burden of being the 12th sign, being the end of the entire zodiacal cycle. And therefore, the transition back into the beginning, where things are very complex in Pisces. And then we move into Aries, where things are very simple. Just like bang headfirst into stuff. Just go for it. Don't ask permission. Just go for it. That's Aries. Pisces is like, is asking permission the right question to ask? Should I be asking a question? Should I employ my everything that I've learned to this point in life in this particular case? Pisces is always questioning itself, right? But it learns to be more decisive. So I think this is an interesting time with Saturn just now going into Pisces, in that over the last few years, there's been, again, appeal after appeal after appeal to false authority. Authorities that are just comprised of other human beings. Okay? No one knows what the fuck they're talking about. No one. Okay? And Pisces, Saturn being the arbiter of moral judgment of all the planets, And Pisces, being what is supposed to be the most developed sign at its high frequency, is really going to separate the wheat from the chaff over the next few years. So if you have bowed down to that false authority in the last few years, if you have seen yourself as a victim in all of this chaos and not taken control over your own journey, your spiritual journey, your well-being, your health, Pisces is the end of the zodiacal cycle, and the truth will be revealed, whether you like it or not, although it always is. Okay. I like Pisces and I like Saturn. To have them together is going to be quite a treat, right? Probably, if I had to guess, one of the coolest, like best people you know is a Pisces sun. And they're the coolest and best person you know because they're a developed Pisces sun. But you might also know an underdeveloped Pisces sun, someone who is not consciously on a spiritual path, on a truth path, who's the worst person ever. So back to what I was saying about, being the last sign. Being the last sign, being a huge burden, having a huge burden on the sign of Pisces. It can be the best of the best or the worst of the worst, right? And when we take that energy, that burden, and we load the planet Saturn with it, Saturn ultimately being about moral judgment, then we're really going to see the best of the best and the worst of the worst. So as difficult as this may sound or be to accept, we have not seen the worst yet, especially in the Western world, as far as socio-cultural and political chaos that's been going on in the last few years. Cultural chaos. People busting through windows, lighting cars on fire, destroying businesses, and beating each other in the street, and thinking that they're on the moral high ground for that. It's fucking absurd. Okay? So some people have already paid the price. Some people have already had the ultimate effect or consequence that Saturn can bring us in that previous Aquarius period. Those are the people who really weren't with it, if we're being honest. Okay. Some people have kind of laid low, stayed quiet, been smart about their moves, haven't given up their power. Those people are in a good place right now. And they're ready for Pisces, whether they feel like they are or not. They're ready for Saturn to be in Pisces, which it is as of earlier this morning. Okay. So, by the way, guys, if you're on YouTube following this stream, feel free to ask questions in the chat, in the live chat. So Saturn in Pisces. Pisces has this sense of universal connectedness or connectivity. I don't know what the proper word would be there. You know what I'm trying to say. Pisces sees everything as connected or everything as disconnected. Everything is both one. Everything has an identity and is also part of the greater organism that is the universe and existence, even in the most metaphysical ways. So a Pisces, being the transition into out of the last part of the zodiacal journey and into the first, Aries, is always reinventing itself, is always trying to reform, not in a legislative sort of way, but in a spiritual way, reform itself spiritually. So Saturn in Pisces, we are deeply reforming our sense of moral duty, who we are fundamentally as individuals living as part of a whole. And again, I have to come back to this all the time. Your birth chart will tell you how this actually affects you individually, because there's going to be a particular place in your life, a particular area of life represented by the house that you have Pisces in, that is going to be affected, that is going to have that reform of identity and the way you manage your energy and power, and ultimately how you set the grounding for that area of life. And um, what principles are you living by? Pisces has a ever expansive way of dealing with everything. That's why it's one of the traditional rulers of Jupiter. Jupiter puts out more energy than it takes in, and it's always expanding. All right. So Pisces is expanding internally in a spiritually individualistic kind of way, because it's an introverted sign. It's water. All right. What's the other ruling sign of Jupiter? Say Sagittarius. Sagittarius is the extroverted version of that. That's why they're always at music festivals. So we have one of the Jupiter internally focused, but still infinitely expanding sign in the planet of restriction and boundaries and principles and karmic fate. Another little metaphor to keep in mind from traditional astrology. I do work with the outer planets, by the way. I'm not restricted to everything that the traditional astrology focused on and nothing else, right? Because we have made discoveries in the last few hundred years, and they've been really, really insightful. And as someone with Pluto, one of those outer planets, on an angle on my midheaven, right on it, like I see the effect of that. I feel the effect of that. I'm told how that shows up in my life by people who know me. And so I can't ignore the importance of the outer planets. But in traditional astrology, there's a reason that they only focused on the inner planets. Well, one being they didn't have telescopes and they couldn't see anything beyond Saturn. But it's that we should be most consciously dealing with that is in our visual frame, things that we can see and actually like have a tangible sense of. Those are the only things we can change, because those are the things that we naturally have an effect on. Like, think of it this way: if we can see something, then it can see us, right? If we can even have a placebo effect, right, from something in astrology. Yeah, they say it might all be placebo. And you know what? There's no like one-to-one causal relationship between the entities in the sky and how they affect us psychologically. They do work, but I mean, I can observe people who aren't into astrology, who are deep skeptics. I can see them living out their birth chart if I have access to their birth chart, right? So I think that's where the proof is that it's not all a placebo, is that you can see the reasons in someone's birth chart why they don't believe in astrology. And that's the wrong way to frame it to begin with. Like, believe in, like, what do you believe really? If you're really on a spiritual path and you're using astrology for the right reasons, you don't have many solid beliefs to begin with, right? Because you're always reassessing. You're always reevaluating your values. Okay. That's part of the necessary, meat essence of being on a spiritual journey. And there are plenty of people who are into astrology who are not on a spiritual journey, and they use how it is that they are and see the world. They use parts of their birth chart to justify their bad behavior. I would say that probably encompasses the majority of people, at least who read astrology in Cosmopolitan magazine. But anyway, try to loop it back. Pisces is always reevaluating, really to its detriment. You know, Pisces is always second guessing itself, so it has a deep problem with being decisive. We look at Saturn. What I was going to say is that there's the metaphorical reason why Saturn is the most distant or last planet that we consider in traditional astrology. Is that it's the last one we can see, and it's the last one that actually does have personal significance. Once you get past Saturn into Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, and asteroids and stuff, you're talking about ways in which you are similar in certain ways to your peers, to everyone else who has Uranus and Capricorn, Neptune, and Capricorn, whatever. But then there's still individuality within that because those are slow-moving planets. Okay, so the house that those planets fall in determines how it is that you are different from your peers. In Uranus's case, it's about relating to social norms. Like, where is it that you're outwardly quirky? All right. Which is in a way what Aquarius, its modern ruler, tries to be, right? And again, the irony there is that, Aquarius likes to act all aloof and cool and, coy. But they couldn't be that way if the group didn't exist to begin with. So they're actually very group oriented. Neptune, we associate more with, all right, how are you quirky, but like in a more introverted and dream nature kind of way? Those are some of the things that we associate Pisces with. All right. So Saturn in Pisces, definitely a time of reinventing the principles that we live by. And I'm not going to say by societal standards, because it's the society and the societal standards that Aquarius for the last few years has been concerned with, obviously, because as a society, we've been divided. Aquarius, you didn't manage it very well. You were overly scientistic and authority seeking, and you fucked up. Okay. And arguably Donald Trump, before this crap happened, he was the Capricorn version of that. Maybe not doing the best job, depending on where you stand. Okay. But we do know for sure that Aquarius got it wrong. Okay. So Pisces is about individual because it's introverted, it's internally focused, and it's all about expansion. And Saturn, the planet we're talking about right now, that sign is affecting, is about personal responsibility, structure, order, principles to live by, and ultimately our karma. Right? Because it's fate related. It's the last planet, the furthest, most distant planet we can see. And so it represents the end. Fate. So we take that ever internally expansive nature of Pisces, apply it to Saturn. What do we get? We get mass revelations among individuals as to whether or not, say, they've handled the last few years in the proper manner, how it is that they're going to expand as spiritual individuals going forward, how it is that they're going to meet their fate, also in an ever expanding way. The ball of yarn is unraveling in a way that we cannot control. All right. Nick G, this is a great and insightful video. Thanks. Thank you, Nick G. Thanks for tuning in and commenting and giving me that lovely compliment. So does that make sense? Ever expansive nature, but internal. So it deals with spiritual health. Saturn moral fate. We're experiencing the uh, unrestricted, uninhibited Saturn doing what the hell it's going to do when it's in Pisces within the context of each individual who has been a part of this shit show of whatever you want to call it for the last few years. Okay. So Saturn's one of my favorite planets, not just because it looks cool, but because it's my ruling and dominant planet of my own birth chart. So again, if you guys want to learn how in detail this Saturn phase, this phase of karmic and moral principle paradigm, we could say, is going to affect you in particular and all the aspects and angular relationships that are being made to Saturn during this time, you can hit me up for a reading. I want to go back to the moon because, okay, it still is a full moon. It's a little bit past the full moon officially. So Virgo full moon right now, it's over, but the moon's still in Virgo, right? People in the Eastern hemisphere were able to see the full moon in the night sky. It wasn't quite full last night here in the West, and it's a little bit past being full right now in the West. So the full moon was officially over the Eastern horizon, the Eastern hemisphere's night sky this time around. Look, sometimes we get the full moon, sometimes they get it. All right. But regardless, what does the moon represent? Again, it's our internal way of coping with reality most deeply. It is our nature of how we think and feel. It's our self-focused nature. It's who we are to ourselves when we're by ourselves. Again, that's why it's so rare in most cases that you get to know someone on their moon sign level, right? So what does the moon deal with? Since it's the fastest moving planet, it changes, it goes through the whole zodiacal wheel every month, every 27 and a half or so days. It represents mood swings because it represents how in the short term we're responding to externals. Okay. So a Virgo moon birth chart person is going to be, not necessarily more or less anxious than anyone else. I would argue Virgo sun is a pretty anxious placement, but Virgo moon depends on what else is going on in the chart. They are going to have a style, have an inclination to pick apart the details of their experiences and their relationship to externals. And they're going to deal with their emotions in a very itemized and organized kind of way. Doesn't mean they don't feel them very much. Virgo's a mutable sign. So it's very shifty. It's very, changeable. But that's just the style in which we, during a full moon in Virgo, because this is when we experience a mini Virgo moon experience. We get a little glimpse about what it's like to have moon in Virgo whenever the moon is full in Virgo. All right. So whatever house you have Virgo in, all right, whatever cusp Virgo covers, it's going to determine the area of life in which you are intimately and perhaps intensely paying attention to detail and dissecting things, figuring out how to understand the inner workings of things, because Virgo likes mechanical moving parts, likes to micromanage things. So let's talk about the relationship between these two signs that we've been dealing with these two planetary shifts, Virgo and Pisces. They happen to be opposite signs. So one of the factors for a full moon is that the sun is always in the opposite sign to the moon during a full moon. So, in a way, you're experiencing a little bit about what it's like to have your moon and your sun in opposite signs. And opposite signs exist to show the dual nature of everything. So do houses. Every sign has its opposite. Every house has its opposite. And when you place too much focus on one of those things, the opposite manifests unconsciously. Okay. So let's look at Virgo and Pisces. They both say something along the lines of everything is connected. Let's figure it out. Let's delve into the details. Virgo, in a tangible way, earth, physical. Pisces, in a watery way, flowy, intuitive, more ideas focused, more emotion focused. Okay. So, in any combination of introverted opposite signs, we have a dual earth and water, representing the dual nature of the physical world, right? There's both earth and water. And so, if you focus too much on the earth, if you live in the desert, what do you need? Like, desert floor is very earthy, but there's no water there, right? If you focus your mindset on retiring in Scottsdale, Arizona, all right? Let's say all the infrastructure that's there isn't there. What you'd be setting yourself up for is a need for water, right? Much like if we are wanting to retire in the middle of the ocean on a island. Might be a more Piscean kind of endeavor for retirement. Just using retirement as an example. I think you should find your passion and work till the day you die. That's what I think. Okay. You're being so water focused, so focused on retiring near the water, completely surrounded by water. I think of Pisces as being stranded in the middle of the ocean with just like infinite space on all sides. You can't see land for miles. You need earth. Okay. If we focus too much on the physical aspect of reality and the details surrounding it, Virgo, we can become a mad scientist very quickly. And we can get caught up in those earthy details and lose a sense of how we feel, what our emotions are like, our intuition, even like how it is that everything is connected and everything is ever expansive. If we're focusing in a Virgo way too much on how things work, we lose a sense of our intuitive perception of the organism that is constituted by those individual parts. That's a Pisces big picture kind of lens. Virgo can lose sense of the big picture very easily whenever it gets. That's why the mental health condition that I associate with Virgo is OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, getting bogged down in the details. For it's different for Pisces. Pisces is overwhelmed by the ever expansive, infinite nature of things, not the details. Pisces can't make to work on time, you know? Going off live on Instagram. Blah, blah, blah. So if you look, conversely, if you get too caught up in the existential, the things that Pisces is concerned with, you lose sense of tangibility. You lose sense of like your grounding and physical stuff. That also has to do with how you feel. That's going to inform the metaphysical if there's a good balance. So, like as with any other pair of opposite signs or houses, Virgo and Pisces, in a way, are perfect complements. What they share in common is that they're both introverted and they're both mutable. So they have that changeability and that adaptability intrinsic to both of them. And they tend not to butt heads unless it is that one can't face themselves, right? Because, like, when opposite signs butt heads, what you're doing is you're showing the other sign what it's lacking, or it's showing you what you're lacking, because opposite signs are perfect complements. They share enough in common to see things eye to eye. They can't help it, right? In a chart wheel, and literally in the sky, if we want to take things to that level, opposite signs are facing each other from across the way. So they can't help but to have to contend with each other. If one of them is out of balance with the other, then the whole wheel is disturbed. It loses its integrity. And this is why somebody who has a high concentration of energy in one area of the chart has a big cluster of planets, like a stellium of 7 planets or something in one sign, in one house, or spanning just a couple adjacent signs and houses, neighboring ones. They can lose sense of the other side of reality, which is what those houses and signs represent. So everything has a balance, a perfect complement for a reason. But duality doesn't exist. It's a myth. Right. And that's why, and it's the dual nature of everything that we see in astrology. That's the reason this is a pagan system. It's not to call it a bad name. Like, the pagans are deeply concerned with truth. But what I'm saying is that all of these sets of dualities between the pairs of the houses and the signs are part of one thing, and that's the birth chart. And that's you. That's your perception, your identity. That's reality. Okay. And so you can see yourself as being limited by your birth chart, without understanding it technically. Okay. Of course, because the more you understand your birth chart technically, the less inclined you're going to be to think that because your birth chart is complex, that you can't understand yourself, or and for that reason, it's you're unlimited, right? But don't get bogged down in the technical aspects of it, even though that's important. If you're an astrologer or an aspiring astrologer, yes, study the basics, be as technical as you can, but you also have to see context. And that's the whole of the birth chart, and that's you. All right. So you have an ability to, in a way, see a snapshot of yourself within the context of your own birth chart. And it's because of that that you're actually taking a bird's eye view on your sets of perceptions and predispositions by looking at your birth chart. It's because of that that you can transcend that you can choose to be a slave to your inclinations or not, or to flow with the natural order of your being and your inclinations when it's right, or choose to ignore that intuition, you know. So Pisces and Virgo are no exception. All right. And interesting that Saturn moves into a new sign at the same time that there's a full moon in the opposite sign. All right. So Saturn just moved into Pisces, full moon in Virgo. So you're getting a snapshot of what it's like to have moon opposite Saturn, which can be a very difficult aspect to have in your birth chart, especially early in life, but it can end up being one of the most powerful ones. Sun is also in Pisces. So Saturn has that extra boost. Okay. That we're we're more consciously Piscean today. It seems like everyone is kind of flowing with the natural order of things a little more smoothly than they were a couple days ago, and that they will be in a couple days' time. Again, not to say that like any of this is deterministic, but the general patterns that we can observe are very subtle. Signs have to do with style of expression of whatever planet we're talking about. Okay. The moon, Saturn, our sense of our own emotional natures, or moon, or a sense of discipline, boundaries, Saturn. Signs are about styles of expression. The planets are the parts of ourselves being affected. Or if we're talking about transits, it's what's passing through, right? But the house that it's in your birth chart represents the area of life, the context that is most affected. Seventh house, one-on-one relationships, could be your marriage, could be a business partnership with one other person. Yeah. Second house, your tangible, your resources, your money, ways of providing comfort and shelter and physical nourishment to yourself. So what happens when you obsess over your own stuff? Let's say second house. Let's talk about another duality within the context of houses. Your own stuff, the stuff that you earn, that's second house. When you say draw too hard of a boundary around your stuff and you don't share, it means that you can't have transaction. You don't have access to other people's stuff. That's the eighth house. Other people's energy, other people's well-being, other people's power that could benefit you. If you have malefic planets in the eighth house, just helping you understand the eighth house a little bit better. Each individual thing we're talking about, okay? Like to be technical. Eighth house is thought of as a malefic, difficult house. Why? Because it deals with other people's stuff, other people's power. So when you mismanage that, it creates an explosion of hardship, crisis. It's the crisis house. But a good accountant typically has some eighth house stuff going on. CPA, just a connection that I thought of. We're heavy into tax season right now. Virgo full moon. I don't know. Maybe there's something to it. The moon's at its fullest external expression right now, being full. Okay. It's going to start waning from here on out. Every month it returns to Virgo. It's going to be a little bit less lit, a little slimmer. A good accountant, a good CPA, typically has a strong eighth house because they're good at managing other people's stuff. All right. So I have actually Virgo in my eighth house. I use a quadrant house system, but for transits, I also use whole sign because I find that whole sign is solid for transits. But I kind of switch back and forth depending on what I'm doing, what kind of astrology I'm doing. Whole sign tends to be really good at predictive stuff, transit stuff, prophecy, fortune telling. Quadrant house system seems to be the most psychologically precise when it comes to birth chart astrology. Porphyry house system in particular is what I use. So I have Virgo, where the moon is right now, covering my eighth house, my entire eighth house. And also on the cusp of my ninth house. And today I've paid acute attention to this, but again, time will tell, pending more data. I've definitely had eighth and ninth house significations. Um, I'm doing a more ninth house thing right now in teaching you guys about certain aspects of the astrology of the day. That's more of a ninth house thing, but it's also an occult subject. Occult subjects kind of get tossed into the eighth house. Um, I did some little scrappy money gigs earlier, which was kind of an eighth house thing, and a second house thing. But I'm also focused on teaching and focused on ideas, which is ninth house. Okay. So where is the full moon affecting you? Okay. House going to determine the themes that are affected, context of life. So just because I have Virgo, micromanagey, really precise OCD Virgo in my eighth house of other people's resources and money, doesn't mean I could be a CPA or that I'm good at math even. I don't have any conscious planets there, right? No planets in my eighth house in my birth chart. So there's nothing directly being contacted by the moon traveling through my eighth house. It just gives a little bit more reflection because moon is your reflection personality. It's how you contemplate things. I've got a little more on my mind as far as other people's stuff, eighth house things. I collected money today from someone who paid me for a gig. Okay. And I'm just paying attention to the subtleties. Again, transits bring subtle changes, subtle themes, subtle styles of perception and expression. You want to focus on your birth chart. If you don't know your birth chart very well, you don't know how any of these external things are actually affecting you. Okay. So always comes back to the same thing. Like focus on yourself first, understanding yourself. Or at least don't worry. Don't let the external world be a source of anxiety for you if you aren't first aware of how it is that you are responding to those externals. That's why birth chart astrology comes first. Then I would say compatibility is the next most important thing for you to focus on. Your relationships. How is it that your chart and another person's chart are affecting each other? It just gives you technical guidelines for understanding the details of that. You know, what's the nature of a relationship that you have with someone? What's the theme? What's the purpose of it? North node in your composite chart is going to tell you that. It's the average of two people's innate sets of perceptions, right? So that's important. That's something that's quite tangible. So know yourself, then know your relationships, how it is you're reacting to people and acting around people who you care about, who you love. You know, do a compatibility analysis with your family that you grew up with to understand why you think you hate your dad. You know, then transits don't come until later. You know, master yourself. Because if you have in your mind, oh God, Virgo full moon is coming, it's going to be going through my eighth house. Like, eighth house is about power play and crisis. Oh God, am I going to like commit a crime or something? Am I going to lie, cheat, steal, rape, murder? Those are all themes of the eighth house. No, but somebody who's like underdeveloped, who doesn't have a good sense of, what's going on, that gives context to the moon going through their eighth house when it's full, then you're not going to get very far with that. But in a paranoid way, you're going to let those externals inform and compel you to act a certain way. You're going to end up manifesting the very thing that you fear. So that's another deeply important thing about getting to know yourself better is that if you can get out of victimhood in every way possible, stop fearing yourself and how it is that you actually react to externals, then you don't fear anything. Because that's when you learn that the things you fear are not the things themselves. It's your reactions to the things that's causing you negative emotion, right? So back to the theme of the day. Pisces and Virgo, they have their own struggles in that regard, as do all of the signs, right? Um, in a way, Virgo fears the details, and like look at someone who has on the extreme end of the Virgo spectrum, we have obsessive compulsive disorder. So someone is anxious because of the inner workings of things, the tangible details. Someone with Pisces placements is not necessarily going to be OCD. Maybe the opposite problem. What would that be? Schizophrenia? Anxious about the endless connections that can be made about anything. Like, have you ever talked to a schizophrenic person? It's like a macro Pisces. It's like a Pisces god on steroids, or Pisces Satan, maybe. I don't know. I think schizophrenia is extremely interesting, right? Because you're dealing with connections. What's causing a schizophrenic person anxiety or depression, even? It's not the detailed inner workings of how this engine works. It's about connections that nobody else sees, whether they're real or not. And, who's to say that it's real or not real? Because if you actually listen to someone who has a lot of Pisces placements, they kind of sound schizophrenic. And if you really listen to them, you can understand what the hell they're saying. You know, like everything is infinitely connected in at least the most subtle ways. Again, everything is infinitely simple and infinitely complex. Virgo, trying to complexify its understanding of the inner workings of things through the details, because there are infinite details. Pisces, in a way, simplifying through a complex avenue of leaps of spiritual connection. What the interconnectedness of everything is. So Saturn, I have this much longer in the stream. That's my rule. So Saturn, we're seeing the ever expansive nature of our spiritual moral principles being revealed. We're going to see the effects of that. So if we're to some degree a spiritually developed being right now, Saturn is going to show us our fate, and it's going to be good. If we are not, then you're probably not on the stream right now, but Saturn is also going to show you your fate, and it's going to be horrifying. That's as close to a prediction as I'm going to get. I'm not a predictive astrologer. I just help people understand their own birth charts and their compatibility charts with their people they're in relationships with, family members. Baby birth charts, I also do that. Okay. Anyway, enough plugging myself. So Saturn is ultimately about fate. It's the last planet, the furthest planet out that we can see. So in a way, it's the end of the road. And the outer planets, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, are really more subtle, more unconscious forces in our lives. Ways that we actually do stand out, but in subtle ways based on the house that we have those planets in. But they bring massive shifts in our lives whenever they transit. Okay. But again, you're just going to be along for the ride, and all of those transits, unless it's just littered with trine aspects, is going to mostly bring hardship and difficult transitions for you. The less you know yourself and the less you know how the positions of those transits are actually contacting everything else in your chart. Okay. So I think that's about it for now, guys. If you are not subscribed, please do so. I'm going to be doing more live streams right now. This is one of my things for Saturn and Pisces. I'm a very Saturn birth chart, and I have Pisces in my second house. Again, I'm going to see, because based on how things go for the next couple of years will determine which house system I'm going to stick with, because I'm very in touch with Saturn, right? I have Saturn on my ascendant in Capricorn, and it's the most heavily aspected planet in my chart. So it's my dominant planet. So paying close attention to Saturn, knowing that it's probably going to have second and third house significations for me in the next couple of years, and knowing that it had first and second in the last few years, last several years. If anybody does astrology in the chat and has a house system preference, let me know. Why do you prefer the house system that you use? Is it Placidus? Because that's kind of just the first one that you came across, because most birth chart websites are set to Placidus by default. Or do you, as many professional astrologers, say I use whole sign because it's the oldest, which is also a fallacy, an appeal to tradition. I think they both have their uses, but I'm going to be paying close attention to Saturn the next few years to see which house system, because Saturn's in one house or the other, depending on the house system that I use. For natal, I use Porphyry quadrant house system. But anyway, I work primarily on Saturn issues in birth chart astrology, general birth chart descriptions, compatibility, 12th house issues as well, which is a place where people tend to misunderstand and get lost. They call it the Pisces house, the ever expansive inner world, right? Of the 12th house, everything non-material, everything metaphysical, everything spiritual and karmic. But yeah, I think that's it. Yeah, subscribe and hit me up if you're interested in a reading or something. Thanks for joining me, guys. And more streams like this in this Pisces Saturn phase for me, because that's kind of a third house thing. Third house is media, and your relationship to media and communication and stuff. And that's what media and social media are. They're a means of communication. That's why they show up in the third house. Okay. That's why that's a theme of the third house. Social media is just a super complex way for us to communicate. Yeah. So that's my, I guess, meditation or commitment for Saturn in Pisces phase, is to do more live streams and be a little more interactive. Okay. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will be posting more in the near future, and contact me if you like, and talk to you later. Bye-bye.